Today I'm going to show you how to make this super simple mobile app animation. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is create a new shape layer and go ahead and select the ellipsis tool from the drop down toolbar here and go ahead and make a nice circle on the page. Center up the anchor point and also center it up right in the middle of the page. That looks good. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to make it look like we're pushing on the button. So we're going to animate the size of the object. So go ahead and hit S on your keyboard and set a keyframe at 100%. Move it out a few frames and go ahead and set another keyframe to 90%. And then we're going to go another few frames out and go back up to 100%. This will kind of give it that push button effect. But it doesn't look quite right just yet. We also need to animate the color when we press down on that button. So go ahead to the drop down and go to the fill section and set a keyframe for the exact same points that we have set for the scale. And I have this color palette up at the top left. You can choose to do that or not, but it just kind of helps keep me organized. So now that we have the keyframe set, we have the bright blue to the dark blue back to the bright blue. So now we should get that nice effect. So let's go ahead and just play this back. Okay, so it's a little quick, so I'm going to go ahead and pull these out just a little bit to see if that kind of improves the animation. Yeah, that's looking better. Okay. Select U on the keyboard to close down the keyframe viewer, and I'm just going to go ahead and label my layer here just to help stay organized. Alright, go ahead and make a new shape layer and select the rectangle tool and just draw a nice thin line here. This will be the vertical part of our plus sign. So make sure that the anchor point's centered, and just go ahead and drag this over the top of the circle that we made earlier. Duplicate the layer and rotate it by 90 degrees. Oh, make sure that you center the anchor point first and then rotate it 90 degrees. And now you'll see we have a nice horizontal and vertical line making up our plus sign. Just make sure it's kind of dialed into the center. And also make sure to label your layers, because it can definitely get confusing very quickly if you don't. So I'm going to go ahead and label my horizontal line first and then my vertical line second. So now we're going to animate the plus sign to give it a nice little rotation effect as the button's being pressed down. So go to your main circle and find where the button is at its darkest point and select the R button on the keyboard for rotation and set a keyframe for that same point. Go and drag the playhead out a few keyframes, and if you just type in here 225, all the shapes that you have highlighted will be in the exact same position. So you want it to be relative to where it is now. So we're just going to drag this out to the 225 degree position. So now you have what was once a plus, now it gets animated to an X. So it doesn't look quite right yet, so let's go ahead and select all the keyframes and right click them. Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. Go to the viewing graph, view everything in viewing port, and highlight the left and right Bezier handles. Make sure that you first highlight all the Bezier handles and then drag it so that you have a nice arc right in the middle. That'll give it kind of a more realistic effect here. All right, select Motion Blur, and I also like to go into the Effects and Presets tab and use CC Force Motion Blur. If you don't see that, just search Force and you'll find it. So drag that out onto each of the objects that we've been animating, and we're going to set that to 52. That kind of gives it a nice, good motion effect. And just make sure to set that on each one of these layers that we're working on. All right, 52. And the last one. Okay, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and play this back in the playhead. Just let it render. All right, it's looking a lot better. All right, go ahead, select your main circle layer, hit Command D to duplicate the layer, drag it below the main circle layer and label it as explosion. I'm going to go in and turn the fill to not have any fill. Hit OK. And then set the stroke layer to 1. So we're creating this explosion layer to add a little bit more of an effect when you push down on the button. So we're going to animate this explosion layer to occur when you push down on the button that actually caused a ripple effect and created this kind of explosion that we're going to animate the scale and opacity keyframes. So let me show you how that works. So when we duplicated this layer, it's brought some keyframes with it. So before you start animating your explosion layer, just make sure that you clear out those previous keyframes. And also you can select on the layer and hit U to see some of the other keyframes that we animated from the previous object. And just make sure you clear those out as well. All right, perfect. All right, let's go ahead and animate the explosion layer scale position. Hit S on your keyboard, set a keyframe for when the button is at its darkest point. Go a few frames out and scale the explosion layer up to about there. Perfect. That's looking pretty good, but explosions don't stay around forever, so we want to also animate the opacity layer so we can make that disappear once the animation is completed. Move your playhead back to the beginning of the explosion layer animation and set an opacity keyframe at the beginning, and then set a second opacity keyframe for a few seconds after the last part of the explosion layer animation. That'll give the explosion layer just enough amount of time on the screen without seeming weird. Next, let's create the mobile navigation that kind of pops out once the button is spinning in rotation. So duplicate the main circle layer 3 times. So we'll have 3 different objects that will pop out of this animation, and bring it below your main circle layer. So also make sure to clear out all the keyframes that you have inherited from the duplication of the layers. So if you don't see this, hit U on the keyboard and it'll pull up all the keyframes of all the objects, and just make sure you're deleting only the keyframes that are associated with the duplicated circle layers here. All right, move the playhead back to the position of when the button is at its darkest point. So this keyframe right here. And we are going to set a position keyframe for these circle layers that we've created. So select all 3 of the circle layers that we've duplicated, hit P on the keyboard, and only with the first circle layer selected, set a keyframe. Drag the playhead out a couple of frames, and let's go ahead and animate this off to the left. All right, it looks like my layer has a little bit of opacity on it for whatever reason, so go up to fill and change the opacity back up to 100. Don't know how that happened, but yeah, we'll go ahead and correct that. change this to, or label this to the left circle. And we're going to select these keyframes and set these as easy ease. So go to keyframe assistant, easy ease, and then go to the graph editor and put everything into frame. Select all of the Bezier handles and just drag that to a nice peak. Okay, and let's go ahead and watch this animation. So it has that nice little zoom effect out. So that's looking pretty good. All right, so next we are going to do the exact same thing that we did with this left circle layer to the other two layers. What we want to do is we don't want the whole animation to occur all at once. We don't want all these shooting out at the exact same time. We want it staggered by a keyframe or two. So go zoom into your playhead and set a position keyframe about 1 to 2 keyframes after the first animation has started to occur. And then do the same thing, do 1 or 2 keyframes after the animation ends. And we'll set the position point here. Perfect. Well, if you're having this opacity problem, just make sure that you're setting those back up to 100, or else it'll start to look weird later on. Right-click, Keyframe Assistance, Easy Ease, and go into the View Graph Editor and move these Bezier handles to have a nice big arc in the middle. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, with this second circle layer completed, we're going to do the same exact thing. We're going to stagger the animation effect by setting a keyframe on the position just another frame or two out from the previous circle that we worked on, and set the endpoint out a few frames after the last circle has finished animating. So that way we get that kind of one shoots out, second shoots out, third shoots out. And make sure to also set the keyframe assistant, easy ease, go into the graph editor, and well, make sure that you have the keyframe selected, go into the graph editor and drag out these Bezier handles. Get that same kind of arch that we've created for the other two. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this back. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Next, let's go ahead and add some icons to this animation to really kind of polish it up. I've created a set of icons that you can use just to help you out. If you already have your own icons, that's fine. You can use those as well. But I've already created these, and you can download them in the show notes below. So what we are going to do first is make sure that the playhead is in a position after the animation has been completed, and hit P on the keyboard and drag this into its final position. Be sure not to set a keyframe, but just drag the positioning of these objects into the appropriate place. So just make sure that everything kind of is all centered up. Just a few more tweaks to this one. Okay, that looks pretty good. To clean this up a little bit, I'm going to make sure to label these layers here. So we'll go ahead and label the top circle and the right circle as well. So we don't have to animate each of these icons independently. We can actually assign parent layers so that these will follow the same path as their parents, quote unquote. So go ahead and select the little @ symbol and drag it on top of the related circle that it's on top of. So when we do this, we'll assign the export to the left circle, and now very, very quickly and easily these will animate along with their parents, but just make sure they're below the main circle so they're hidden upon start of the animation. Okay, it's acting a little weird. It looks like I have another layer that needs to up the fill. 100%. Okay, much better. And now let's replay the animation. One shoots out, two shoots out, and that one is a little off, a little lock button. So I'm going to move the position just slightly. Just going to drag it. Okay, so let's replay this one more time. All right, looking much better. Perfect. Okay, so with the basic animation completed, we are going to add in another layer. And this is another object that I created that you can download from the same link below. This is the app template. So I've created this to kind of help you guys out, and you can use it however you like. So it's just a Photoshop file, drag and drop. Make sure to have editable layer styles in here, and you can just place that right on your screen. Go ahead and move the scale position to kind of fit the page. And then also make sure to move the layer below all the other layers that we've created here. So in order to move this plus sign, you have to make sure that you also bring all the keyframes with it. So just make sure to highlight all the keyframes and all the layers and move this object down to kind of fit the screen. So let's just drag that a little bit further. Okay, so that looks like a pretty good position on the screen there. So now, in order to kind of make the effect look real on this iPhone, we need to add another layer in here. So just create a new shape layer and drag out on top of the screen a nice rectangle. And then we're going to change the fill opacity to 70. And we're going to drag this below all the circle layers, just right above the app layer. Okay. Now we want to do this when, or we want the tent layer to show when the button has been pressed down, so we want that to animate. So let's go ahead and see where the keyframes were set for when that happened. And looks to be right about there. And we just need to set a keyframe on the tent layer, and we're just going to do, if you hit the end bracket, it'll cut the layer to that point in the playhead, so it won't show up prior to that. So we are going to set a keyframe on the opacity layer to I'm going to set it to 0, hit a keyframe, and then move it in the playhead and move it back up to 70. So now we should get, let it render first. All right, so there's your final animation. Hope you enjoyed this one. Go ahead, leave a comment for me below so you can tell me what you want to see next. But next week, we're going to cover this effect right here.